I'm going to talk about imperialism and a country I know well, and a country that I've had a long association with in my professional life and in my personal life, and that is Iran. And I want to talk about Iran because anyone who calls himself an anti-imperialist needs to know that you need to be supporting Iran, whether you're a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, a Buddhist, or a person of no faith, because the reality is that the fight against imperialism is not an abstract concept for Iran. It's a lived reality, and it's been that way for 40 years. So we're not talking about people in ivory towers intellectualizing about the fight against imperialism. We're talking about a nation and a people that has been doing it physically and intellectually for 40 years. And if we define imperialist countries as a bloc broadly led by the United States, with Britain, let's say, as a junior partner, and in the Middle Eastern context, Saudi Arabia and Israel as the partners of imperialism, well, Iran has an unmatched record of fighting these imperialist powers directly and indirectly for those 40 years. Iran fought imperialism to establish itself in 1979, when the Shah made Iran a plaything for Western spies and corporations. And it fought cultural imperialism, Western cultural imperialism, to establish itself as an Islamic republic, giving voice to the majority of its Muslim people. And it's been fighting Western economic warfare for those 40 years as well. Iran fought imperialism in the 1980s when it fought Saddam Hussein, sponsored by the West, sponsored by Arab nations, attempting to destroy Islamic Iran at birth. It fought Israeli and, by extension, Western imperialism in Lebanon and in Gaza. If Iran had not supported Hezbollah in Lebanon, Lebanon would now be called Greater Israel. That's a fact. Iran has fought American imperialism in Iraq post-2003, ensuring the country did not become effectively an American colony. And I would argue that it did the same in a more indirect way in Afghanistan. Iran is a winner, and that's its real crime. And it's been fighting imperialism in Syria for the last few years. Make no mistake, if Iran hadn't intervened in Syria at the behest, at the invitation of Damascus, then ISIS and Al-Qaeda would be ruling vast swathes of that country now. Yet Donald Trump takes all the credit for defeating ISIS. BS, quite frankly. And it's not a coincidence that the Western and regional nations that are supporting the enemies of Damascus are in fact imperialist countries and their agents in the region. Yet many on the left, the so-called anti-imperialist left, find it difficult to support Iran. And I can only assume that that's because they believe the lies and the misleading comments of the Western mainstream media. The media of the imperialist countries like the BBC that they constantly rail against, yet when it comes to Iran, they swallow everything they say. An imperialist media which gives a voice, which amplifies the minority voice of Iranian exiles with a grudge against the Islamic Republic, who would, quite frankly, who wish to go back to Tehran on the back of an American tank. So Iran is demonized in the Western media for supporting terrorism, for trying to make nuclear weapons, for its human rights record, its lack of democracy, its anti-Semitism, and much, much more. Let me first say that, of course, Iran is not perfect. I'm sure there are bad people in Iran, like there are in any country in the world. I'm sure Iran has made mistakes. I won't enumerate that. You can just read the Western press. Iran is run by human beings and they are fallible, so I'm sure it has done bad things and will continue to do bad things. But what everyone must understand is that Iran is a country under threat. And countries under threat restrict freedoms. And I would argue that countries under economic, military, cultural threat must restrict freedoms. Because if they don't, you're going to get an Iraq-type civil war scenario or a Syria-type civil war scenario. And Iran is not stupid. The leaders of Iran are playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. They know that they know all about the Western plans for their country, the Saudi plans for their country, the Israeli plans for their country, and they're not going to let their country be destroyed like Iraq has been destroyed, like Syria has been destroyed. Western-sponsored wars, economic sanctions and destabilization programs have taken a toll on Iran. There's no doubt about that. Iran's institutions have not been allowed the freedom to develop like institutions in Britain have had hundreds of years to develop. And I would argue that you can't really judge Iran, which is 40 years old, Islamic Iran, until it's had decades or more than that to develop its institutions in peace and security. Yet despite that, Iran remains a peaceful, stable, strong country in a region of chaos and absolute turmoil. Its people have more liberties than most people in the region. It has a limited democracy, and its government rules with the consent of the majority. Yes, the majority of Iranians back the Islamic Republic of Iran. Go there and that would be obvious. Its leaders constantly seek to differentiate between the apartheid political ideology that is Zionism and the great religion which is Judaism. And it gives voice to the Islamic sentiments of the majority of its population. And quite frankly, if you're a Western liberal, you aren't going to agree with some of those Islamic sentiments. But quite frankly, it's none of your business. Because it's not up to a white Western liberal to tell Iran how to run its country. It's up to Iranians to decide which way they want to run their country. The job of Western anti-imperialists is simply to stop their governments from attacking Iran, militarily, economically, and culturally. That's your job, not to pontificate about human rights in a country you do not understand, in a region you don't understand. So if the anti-Iran brigade really want Iran to open up and reform, then I would say your job is to encourage your own governments to let Iran breathe. Because that's when countries open up and reform, when they're no longer under threat and when they have the space to do it. So let's cut the BS. Iran's real crime isn't human rights, it's not anti-Semitism. Its real crime in the eyes of the West is the fact that it's independent. The fact that it takes its own decisions, domestically and foreign decisions. The fact that it is Islamic, and the fact that it is committed to ridding the Middle East of foreign interference. And an independent Islamic and anti-imperialist Iran is just not acceptable in Western eyes in a region which is so strategic and oil-rich. But I'll tell you what, Iran doesn't need your help, because Iran can defend itself. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. It's not Libya in 2011. It is not a defeated country. It is a strong, modern country with two major superpower allies, Russia and China. It is not isolated like the Western media would have you believe. It has the capacity to set off fires all across the Middle East because it has allies, and it's militarily very strong. And that's the reason why it hasn't been attacked yet. Because the West likes to pick on the weak, not the strong, and Iran is strong. Iran will stand firm, I'm confident of that. But let's just fantasize a little bit. and assume that it falls. Imagine if it falls, what would happen? It would be a huge victory for our enemies, for the imperialist West, for imperialist Israel, the Zionist entity, and for imperialist Saudi Arabia. It will lead to a huge war because millions of Iranians will die for the Islamic Revolution. They will literally die. You go there, they're ideologically convinced by the Islamic Revolution and what it's brought to them in terms of dignity and independence, just like the Venezuelan people are convinced about their revolution. And it also, if Tehran falls, it will lead to a regional war of unimaginable consequences. For all these reasons, Western anti-imperialists need to unequivocally and unapologetically support the Islamic Republic of Iran, even though you might religiously and culturally disagree with some of its values. Anything less than that, forget about calling yourself a true anti-imperialist. And I'd just like to end by saying something which is probably going to upset a few people, but I don't care. In Iran, there's a revolutionary slogan, which is repeated and chanted at Friday prayers every Friday. Death to America, death to Israel. Now, that does not mean that Iranians want to destroy America or Iranians want to destroy Israel. You go to Iran and it is one of the most welcoming countries you would ever go to. And yes, ordinary Iranians love Americans. They love Westerners. You get a massive welcome when you go there. It is a political slogan which expresses the Iranian people's opposition politically to America and politically to Israel. And it is a way of mobilizing the masses in Iran itself in the fight against Western and Israeli imperialism. So I'd just like to end this speech by saying, death to America, death to Israel.